From Climate Watch, a new study says Earth's temperature is expected to increase more within the next 50 years than it has within the past 6,000 years combined. Extreme hot zones like the Sahara Desert currently cover 1% of the Earth. Those areas are expected to expand across 1/5 of the planet in the next half century. Experts from the National Academy of Sciences say this will make entire nations unlivable and force a mass migration. ProPublica reporter Abrahm Lustgarten worked with the New York Times to dig into the data and map out what this great migration would look like. And he joins me now. Abrahm, thanks very much for being with us. Which regions have already started experiencing climate migration, and to what extent?
Sure. Well, the hotspots for climate change are the same hotspots that we're starting to see the movement of people out of, and that's Central America, the Sahel region of Africa, and South Asia, so India and places like Thailand and Indonesia. And climate's influence on migration is subtle, and it's going to start slowly, and it has begun slowly. And so you're seeing, millions of people, but not yet tens of millions of people move in those regions. There have been research that has connected the conflict in Syria to climate, derived drought and environmental pushes, and the same with some of the migration out of Libya and the Arab Spring uprisings as well.
Well, you mapped out several different scenarios that could take place within the next 50 years. Some involve potential political decisions, including border policies. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so what we did in our research is created a data modeling analysis that looked at both climate scenarios and what the United Nations calls the development scenarios. And the development scenarios consider different economic pathways for future development, and they range from, great trade, extensive globalization, the kind of economic development that we see now, to a retraction of aid from developing countries, and all of those things make a difference, as well as climate. And so we found that to completely generalize, with the less aid, the less development, less developed countries tended to see surges in population, more trapped populations, and those things would generally correspond to less welfare, higher food insecurity, less food supplies, slower economic growth, and more poverty.
So given that, when can northern countries expect to see the greatest influx of climate refugees, and what should they be doing to prepare?
So we modeled up to 2050, which is really just 30 years from now. The trend is increasing, and you might expect that the migration flows that we predicted might increase through the years that follow that, as well as climate worsens. But it's a generally upward sloping trend up until that time. And the kind of things that migration experts, the United Nations, and other academics say is important to prepare are kind of standard urbanization, better urban planning, making sure that there's enough affordable housing, that there's enough infrastructure in the places where populations might increase. And these are actually the same things, whether it's migrants moving to New York from California or migrants moving to New York from Guatemala. But is to make sure that there, are jobs for them in public transit and all of these things. And it's the lack of those services when you have a population that's mismatched with services in an urban area that can lead to all sorts of instability and, a wider gap between the wealthy and the poor in our society.
Well, you mentioned in your reporting that climate migration can actually benefit northern countries. How so?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we are a country that's benefited from migration, in the past, whether it's, immigrants from Ireland or from Europe or from Central America. The United States, like other northern countries and much of Europe, faces a demographic decline in the years to come. We have an aging population and a reproduction rate that doesn't necessarily support having an active and young workforce to support the kind of economic growth that we're accustomed to and we'd like to see in the decades to come. And so when economists look at that demographic change, they see a need for a new workforce for young, energetic people, and migration is a source of that workforce potentially.
Well, at this point, is there anything that can be done to reduce the number of people predicted to be displaced by climate change?
Yeah, I mean, Certainly, addressing the severity of climate change is one good place to start, and we still have an opportunity to do that. So, in our research and our computer modeling, we found that the degree of movement, the large numbers of people that would be displaced, corresponds to the more severe climatic change and the hotter the temperatures would get. And so, to the extent that we can reduce emissions now, that is one thing that will likely have a direct effect on the number of people displaced and the number of regions that become less hospitable to where people live. Another significant thing is to continue or expand international aid. I mean, the economic support that we provide some of these countries that are going to be hit hardest by climate change is essential, both to aid their urbanization and modernization, but also to directly support their ability to grow food. It's food insecurity and the difficulties of farming and water shortages in the future that are going to be the most significant things that drive migrants out of their homelands and to look for new places to live. Introduce drought-resistant crops in Guatemala, for example. We've largely cut that aid. Reinstating that and expanding programs like that can have a dramatic impact. My research showed in keeping people in the countries where they live now.
All right, Abrahm Lustgarten. Abrahm, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for your interest.